welcome to this event. We'd like to start with Gidon Klaus of the British Israel Chamber of Commerce.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the BICC Northwest Fair Zoom event in 2021. I would like to thank Israel Bonds for co-hosting this event, and in particular to the Executive Director, Joe Ozer, and his assistant, Jessica, who have been most helpful and a pleasure to work with. I speak on behalf of our President, Nigel Alliance OBE, the Chairman, Brian White, and the Northwest Committee to thank our members for their continued support of the Chamber activities. Anyone who wishes to join the Chamber, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Have a nice
Thank you, Gidon. Before we officially start the proceedings, I'd like to run through the workings of today's event. After the talk by our speakers, there will be a Q&A session. Participation is very easy. All you will have to do is to raise your hand. Not physically, of course, but by using the raise hand button at the bottom right-hand side of the participants list. If you're on a smartphone or a tablet, just tap the screen and the options to bring up the participants list will pop up at the bottom. Once you've raised your hand, I will call upon you to ask your question when it's your turn to do so. I will be able to request to unmute you. All you have to do is accept the request and start talking. I will remute you also, so you can just relax and listen to the answer. Please remember to have your camera switched on so that we can see you as you ask your questions. I'd like to now call on Brian White, Chairman of the BICC, to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Joe. By the way, if you're like me and you're wondering where the raise hand button is at the bottom right, it's actually labeled reactions. So if you click on reactions, there's about 5 or 6 different reactions you can have, including raising your hand. But if you're looking for raised hands for the questions and answers later on, it's under the reactions button, bottom right. So that's the housekeeping. First of all, welcome to this Zoom BICC meeting. I apologize we're not providing you with lunch. You'll have to provide your own lunch because of the COVID effect. The Chamber continues to do great work under the stalwart of Gidon Klaus. We do some fantastic work opening up the Northwest to Israeli companies. There's been some notable successes in the food, particularly in the food industry, and also in the healthcare industries as well. We continue to work closely with the Israel British Chamber of Commerce. As Gidon says, those of you who are members, thank you. Those of you who have not yet joined, please join us. It's very important. It's the lifeblood of our chamber, the membership. Without that, we can't continue to keep doing the facilitation work and the connection work that we continue to do with the university sectors, the technology sectors in Israel and in the Northwest. And we continue to be a springboard to generate business between the two countries. We're very fortunate later on to have our speaker, Lord Ward-Atherton, speak to us. Healthcare has been a very important area. I happen to be speaking to you from Zichron Yaakov in Israel, which is where I am. I have already had my jab and I'm not yet 60, and my second jab is scheduled for the 31st of January. There's a lot that the UK can learn from healthcare in Israel, and there's a lot that Israel can learn from healthcare in the UK. It's a win-win combination. But like I say, I just want to record my formal thanks to Israel Bonds for sponsoring this, to Gidon Klaus for organising everything and all the hard work he puts in on a day-to-day basis at the Chamber, and reiterate my point about membership. If you're not a member, please join us, and one day we are very much looking forward to be able to be providing lunch for you on a face-to-face basis. We very much look forward to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Before our speakers get into the nitty-gritty of today's topic, I would like to just let those of you who don't know about Israel Bonds hear a little bit about what they are. Israel Bonds, like you'd imagine, are a part of Israel's sovereign debt issuances. They are a financial product that have been issued directly by the Ministry of Finance for the past 70 years in North America and in the rest of the world. Israel issues this debt in sterling, euros, and dollars for a range of maturity dates, minimum amounts, and increments. With different interest-bearing schedules, you can purchase a bond to match your own investment portfolios, whether it's for planning for your retirement or simply to purchase a £100 gift for a celebration. Your bond with Israel can be expressed with Israel bonds. Now, before Lord Ward-Atherton begins, please welcome Dr. Menachem Oberbaum of the Sha'arei T'zedek Medical Centre in Israel. Dr. Oberbaum is the head of the department of complementary medicine at the hospital, and would like to let us know a little bit about the steps that his team have been taking in terms of trialing some treatments for COVID-19. Menachem, if you would like to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Roser, for the opportunity to speak in front of this esteemed audience. A keen observer may notice that in the recent years, there has been a significant impact of complementary and alternative medicine professions in the conventional medicine. If about 30 years ago, no journals of complementary and alternative medicine was to be found among the scientific journals, then today there exist over 24 such journals. Whereas in 1980, homeopathy was mentioned only 3 times in the conventional literature, one of them as a letter to the editor, one as an article in a German scientific paper called The Village Physician, and none as a clinical study. 50 years later, already 142 articles that deal with homeopathy may be recently found in the conventional literature. This phenomenon can be explained, but it will exceed the boundaries of the 5 minutes which the organizer kindly granted me. Allow me just to share with you 2 of the activities at our unit, which is an integral part of one of the teaching hospitals of the School of Medicine in Jerusalem, the Sha'arei T'zedek Medical Centre. About 25 years ago, the hospital management decided to create a unit of complementary and alternative medicine at the hospital. It had been appointed to establish this, I had been appointed to establish this unit and to head it. Its mission had been defined by the Director General of the hospital at that time, Professor Jonathan Halevi, to promote complementary and alternative medical research and offer complementary and alternative medical services to those patients require it. We decided to introduce only 2 complementary and alternative medical professions, acupuncture and homeopathy. One of them already with 1 leg in the lounge of conventional medicine, and the other deep in the basement of the mainstream medicine. Today, we have about 12 acupuncturists at the delivery room of the hospital, which is responsible to birth of about 16,000 newborn in every year. As far as I know, the only hospital in the Western world which provides such a service free of charge and whose acupuncturists belong to the normal staff of the hospital. Regarding homeopathy, just let me introduce you 2 of the achievements as our unit gained recognition. The first one is as our unit gained recognition beyond the boundaries of our country. A memorandum of understanding had been signed between our unit and the Indian Ministry of Ayush, which is responsible for complementary and alternative medicine in India. The initiative for this memorandum was actually an Indian initiative. The memorandum had been signed at the official visit of Benjamin Netanyahu in India 3 years ago in the presence of the Indian and the Israeli prime ministers. The first result of this memorandum of understanding is a large clinical trial which runs already over 2 years in India and which was planned in Jerusalem. In this trial, a group of newborn which had been treated for medical problems, for any medical problems, during the first 2 years of life with homeopathy was compared to a similar group of a newborn treated with conventional medicine. Difference of health and development parameters were noted. The study is about to end and promises to reveal very interesting and probably quite surprising conclusions. Another interesting project started from the decision to evaluate the therapeutic efficacy of homeopathy in treating moderate to severe COVID-19 patients. We decided to test it on 15 patients, and if the results will be promising, to run a randomized clinical trial. The results were so encouraging that already after treatment of 7 hospitalized COVID-19 patients, 2 of them in the intensive care unit, it was decided to stop this pilot study and to prepare for a planned clinical trial. In these days, the study protocol passed the ethical research committee, and in a week from now, we will start a trial which will be the first triple-blinded homeopathic trial in which 363 patients are to be participate. All this is very exciting to my mind, and I'm happy to share at this difficult time a feeling that for complementary and alternative medicine, this will be perhaps an opportunity to prove to its numerous skeptics that it can be a reliable therapeutic tool and sometimes even a decisive one in order to improve health and save life. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Menachem Oberbaum. We're very lucky to have Lord Ward-Atherton speaking to us about himself and his career in homeopathy. A month before starting medical school in Dublin in 1976, Lord Ward-Atherton was diagnosed with early MS. Thanks to his discovery of the homeopathic work in a clinic in Germany, Lord Ward-Atherton made a full recovery, leading him to study homeopathy for his own career. Lord Ward-Atherton has risen to have attained consultant practicing privileges at 3 hospitals in Liverpool within the private sector. Please welcome Lord Aaron Kenneth Ward-Atherton.
Good afternoon, everybody. Was there a video that you were going to put? Has that already happened, or?
We'll play it as soon as you're ready. If you'd like us to start it now.
Absolutely, yes, and then I can lead in from there, Joe. Yeah,
great.
Thank you.
This July saw the most significant and important international seminar ever organised anywhere in scientific terms to support a credible reason as to why homeopathy is so effective globally. The New Horizons in Water Science event commenced with a dinner at the prestigious House of Lords and was followed by a hugely successful seminar at 1 Wimpole Street, home of the Royal Society of Medicine. I was fortunate to be able to assemble some of the world's most preeminent scientists who were able to follow on from the work that was originally started by the late and celebrated Professor Jacques Benveniste and his incredibly important discovery, the memory of water. The New Horizons seminar had the personal support of not one, but 2 Nobel laureates, namely Professor Luc Montagnier, famous as the co-discoverer of HIV, and Brian Josephson, Emeritus Professor and Nobel laureate in physics from the University of Cambridge. The seminar featured other international world-acclaimed scientists, Professor Vladimir Voyakov from Moscow State University, Professor Gerald Pollack from the University of Washington, Professor Jayesh Belair from Bombay, and Dr. Menachem Oberbaum from Jerusalem, together with Dr. Raj Manchanda, Director General of the Central Council for Research in Homeopathy at the Ministry of Ayush within the Government of India. Doctors Manchanda and Oberbaum represent the first ever government agreement between Israel and India to research homeopathy internationally. Finally, Dr. Rob Verkerk, Executive and Scientific Director of the Alliance of Natural Health International. I believe what was achieved with this initial seminar in scientific terms has been immensely groundbreaking and important for homeopathy, not only in the UK but all over the world. I'm sure the incredible presentations witnessed at the New Horizons seminar in terms of how water behaves and its ability to hold information for therapeutic purposes will in time shape the future delivery of healthcare for millions of people. I was personally able to play a prominent role in making this happen for all of us who practice and deliver and believe in homeopathic medicine.
Okay, good morning, everybody. And thank you to the Chamber for inviting me to give this short presentation. I realise that we have about 15 minutes, so I want to try and pack as much as I can into that time. Thanks to Joe Ozer and Jessica Sharma for the IT side of the presentation. Also, a warm welcome to my colleague and dear friend, Menachem Oberbaum. We've shared many times, also in India last year or the year before last, supporting homeopathy. And I think the work that Menachem is doing in Israel is incredibly forward-thinking. And so I wish him every success with that. I'd also like to welcome here today the professor we saw in the initial clip, and that's Professor Emeritus Brian Josephson from Cambridge University, a keen supporter of homeopathy, who presented at that conference some very interesting work. And I think Brian, a little bit later on, will be able to say a few words about what he's doing. So what's my story? Why am I supporting homeopathy so vehemently? And why has the UK turned its back on homeopathy after 150 years? Remembering that we had hospitals all over the place under the NHS. We had the Liverpool Homeopathic Hospital, Manchester, Bristol, of course, the famous Royal London Homeopathic Hospital, where the Queen is the patron. Now it's His Royal Highness, although the hospital has been stopped, as far as I understand. So what's the story here? I'll tell you what happened to me. This is really interesting, and I think it's important, and why my career change came from conventional medicine into studying homeopathy in Germany. When I was a student back in 1976, I was due to start medical school in Dublin. I'd actually done a 3-year course prior to that in nursing to ground myself ready for this course. And lo and behold, about 4 or 5 weeks before I was due to go to Ireland, I developed some very strange symptoms, very worrying symptoms. Anyone that knows a person with a multiple sclerosis will recognize the symptoms of blurred vision, double vision, numbness, tingling, difficulty in walking, and all of those things sort of set in very rapidly with me. So I was admitted to the local neurological unit in Liverpool. All the various investigations took place, spinal punctures and everything else. And there was a conclusion from all of that that it was in fact multiple sclerosis. Quite an impact for a young man in his 20s to hear that diagnosis, especially when you've worked in a hospital and seen, you know, the outcomes of some of these terrible neurological conditions. At the time, all that could be offered was steroid treatment. I think today we probably have, you know, immunological preparations which are making strides, of course, in that disorder. But at the time, it was steroids. Now, whether it was by divine provocation or not, I don't know. But a friend of my father, who was a GP, had read something in the paper in the UK about an Olympic gold medalist who'd, same story, had been struck down with multiple sclerosis. From a runner, won gold medals, literally not being able to stand or walk. And she'd gone off to a clinic outside Stuttgart for this homeopathic therapy, homeopathic treatment. And the clinician at the time was the late Professor Reinhold Voll, who developed his own system of applying homeopathic treatments. Dr. Voll was a conventionally trained doctor and also a homeopathic physician. And so I arrived there on one cold morning, 8 o'clock in Stuttgart at his clinic for an initial appointment. So he looked at me and he said to me, you know, what you have is a very difficult condition, but not for me, which was very heartening at the time. And so he set about treating me with homeopathy. Now, the treatment I had was by injection. It was a 3-month course of weekly injections of multiple remedies. There's different ways of applying homeopathy. One is a single remedy or a single medicine, and other ways you combine them. So in his case, he combined the remedies, and I had 12 weeks treatment back to Germany, 12 weeks treatment back to Germany. And I was there going over there for about 5 years. And slowly but surely, my vision improved, got back to normal. I was able to walk better. My balance came back. And ultimately, within a period of years, I appeared to be back to normal. And this stunned some of the neurologists in Liverpool. They couldn't understand it, although we did have NHS homeopathy at that time. But they were very, very interested to know how he'd achieved something that they diagnosed as being incurable, really. So you can understand that that's brought about a career change for me. I was convinced that this is the way to go. And I ended up going back to Germany and spending some time studying homeopathy. And later in London, of course, at the Royal London Homeopathic Hospital, I took further courses. And then today, of course, I'm working now as a homeopath in hospital and utilizing what I think is an incredible system of medicine. Homeopathy began back in the 1750s. It's Samuel Hahnemann was the doctor attributed to have discovered this. It's not a new idea. The Greeks knew that if you took something that could harm you and made it very, very small amounts, a bit like a vaccine actually, then you could stimulate the body's own healing capabilities. And this is what Hahnemann had discovered and wrote about in a famous book called The Organon, his observations. And we do use a range of medicines, mainly made from poisonous substances, plants, minerals, metals. But when I talk about poisons, the medicines are not poisonous when you receive them. They're infinitesimal doses. And the aim is to stimulate the body's own recuperative powers. And in my case, it seemed to work. So we still do have homeopathy today, albeit it's not quite what it was. And I just want to touch upon the reasons for that. In the year 2000, because of the popularity of complementary medicine, or as we call it today, integrated medicine, the House of Lords decided to look at what's the story here. Why are so many people going to osteopaths, acupuncturists, homeopaths, herbal therapists? And so they produced a report under the late Lord Walton, who was president of the GMC, I think at the time, or had been, and they took all the evidence and looked at these 5 popular medicines. Now, following that, for some reason, homeopathy was singled out for a critique, a huge critique, and I rather think that was because it was available on the NHS in a range of hospitals throughout the UK, with a very small budget, incidentally, of £5 million. That's all it cost to run those services. And people were deriving benefit, and there were people going to those hospitals who couldn't afford private treatment. However, there was a campaign to get rid of homeopathy, and I think it's because it's one of those complementary therapies that was in the NHS. So there was a concerted campaign. First of all, it wasn't evidence-based. Secondly, it was mumbo jumbo, or it was a placebo. All of these arguments were put forward. The following thing that took place was a select committee investigation in Parliament, and people were called forward to give evidence. We had some very, very notable, esteemed medical doctors who did homeopathy, pharmacists, researchers. But in the end, Parliament decided to throw out the whole ideology of homeopathy on the basis that it wasn't evidence-based medicine. And so after that, slippery slope, funding was removed by the clinical commissioning groups in the UK, and slowly these hospitals that have been in existence for 150 years in the UK were slowly closed. I should mention at this juncture as well that homeopathy was incorporated by Act of Parliament in 1948, and some other interesting facts and figures. In 1854, when the cholera epidemic swept London, only 13% mortalities with people treated with homeopathic medicine by the newly opened Royal London Homeopathic Hospital, whereas 53% mortalities at the Middlesex Hospital. Those facts I'm giving you were reported in Parliament and are recorded in Hansard. So you would ask yourself the question why homeopathy has disappeared out of the NHS in the UK, but it appears to have done so. Well, we have to look at this again. If there's a therapy that's helping people, then we shouldn't be turning our back on it. We could take it to another level and say, where is the choice for patients? Where is the choice? Should people be denied a treatment modality that could help? And this doesn't underestimate conventional medicine. I mean, I'm full supporter of conventional medicine, drugs, incredible drugs, vaccines, surgery that we all need these days. But the armory in the therapeutic cupboard should also include homeopathy. That should be a tool that's also in the cupboard. Recently, in this pandemic, I was asked to try to help some people with severe COVID. In fact, they were hospitalized. And strangely enough, the clinicians in the hospital agreed to it because the patients were so very ill. They weren't on ventilators, but they were certainly on oxygen. And all of those people, I'm pleased to say, there was 4 of them have made a full recovery. Now, I'm not claiming that was all homeopathy. Patients would take a different view and say it was, but the main thing is that they have recovered. So if we've got a therapeutic tool that can help, why should we disregard it? This was the impetus for the conference I put together that you saw at the introduction, because after the 2000 House of Lords report and the 2010 Select Committee report, I felt we needed to redress the balance in the argument here. And so I was able to bring together those scientists. And I can tell you that the science tells a different story to the narrative that we hear from the people that want to take away homeopathy, or the choice of having that in the NHS in the UK. I should add at the moment that you can still receive private treatment. And the light at the end of the tunnel is that in Liverpool, we have started a low-cost clinic with a GP that practices homeopathy and some other homeopaths, non-doctor homeopaths, and we're able to offer a low-cost service. So we haven't gone away, but why we should have been denied the NHS facilities is questionable. A little bit quickly on the science, I'm just watching the time. Ben Venister, renowned scientist in France, who Menachem worked personally with, and Brian Josephson had come to Cambridge University and present, had discovered way back that if you take a blood cell called a basophil and you expose it to an antibody called IgE, immunoglobulin E, which is made into a homeopathic dose, that is minuscule IgE, the basophils seem to respond to those dilutions. So the paper, I think, in Nature was described as ghostly antibodies affect basophils. And this was a sudden phenomenon that sort of broke apart science as we knew it. Sadly for Ben Venister, he was almost run out of town as a credible scientist, and it ruined his career. He had found something. The scientists at the time denied it was possible. And sadly, he died not long after that, having heart surgery. At that point, the Nobel laureate Luc Montagnier picked up the thread, and he took the lab over from Benveniste, and he continued research. And what he's discovered, along with others, and I'm talking about people in Russia, in the USA, in India, in the UK, is that when you dilute these medicines so infinitesimally that there's virtually nothing left, actually there is a new science taking place, so-called EMSs, or electromagnetic signals, or biosignals. The Russians have had 3 testing modalities at Moscow State University, which reveals there is a therapeutic activity when you take the atoms of the substance away. So for scientists and doctors to say in the UK, homeopathy is crazy, there's nothing left, it's all in the mind, it's placebo, it's suggestion, then my suggestion to them is that they should look at Russia, they should look at people like Jerry Pollack in Seattle, who've also found this phenomena. They should certainly look at Nobel laureates Luc Montagnier and Brian Josephson and think again. But unfortunately, the narrative still remains in the UK that homeopathy is all suggestion. I can attest personally that I don't think that's the case. And I can tell you of thousands of patients who could give an equal testimony of a return to health due to homeopathy. So it's something I don't think we should turn our back on. And I think the most extraordinary news that we've got today is that Israel, which is so innovative, is actually taking up the mantle. And I wish Menachem every success with this project that he's been given the green light for. And if Israel leads the way, well, it's fantastic. Then maybe the UK will look again at something which I think is a very underestimated therapeutic tool in helping people. At the end of the day, you know, it's not just about choice, it's about hope. And I'll just leave you with one comment. When the Liverpool Homeopathic Hospital was built in the 1850s, actually by Sir Henry Tate of the Tate and Lyle Sugar Empire, who recovered with homeopathy. He gave the money to build the building there in Liverpool. They actually built it on a street in Liverpool called Hope Street. And on Hope Street, you've got 2 cathedrals. You've got the Anglican Cathedral one end, and you look down the street and you've got the Roman Catholic Cathedral. So there on Hope Street is still today the building of the original Hahnemann Hospital. Sad to say, it's student accommodation. However, it's ironic that he built that hospital in a street called Hope Street. So I leave you with the parting comment that we should have choice in the NHS. People shouldn't have to pay privately for homeopathy, and don't take hope away from people, because, you know, if there's some hope with anything, and it's not just homeopathy, then who are we to destroy that hope, often in people who are critically ill and just are trying to get better. I hope I've completed the 15 minutes, Gidon. I think I'm within time. So I'll hand you back to Joe. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this incredible insight into your work. We're now moving on to the Q&A portion of the event. Don't forget to ask your questions. It's with our greatest pleasure to answer them. All you have to do is raise your hand by pressing the raise hand button on the right-hand side of the bottom of the participants list. Or as Brian pointed out in the reactions, if you are on a smartphone or tablet, just tap the screen and the options to bring up either the participants list or the reactions will be at the bottom of the screen. We are going to start the Q&A with just a message from Brian Josephson. Professor, if you would like to say something to
right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Well, first of all, I'd like to follow up Aaron's comments. In the UK, I'd like to say that I hope things will change in the UK. I don't know. It's a difficult job, but we have a very open-minded MP in Cambridge, and perhaps he can watch this video, and maybe perhaps there can be pressure in Parliament. Who knows? And there certainly are these pressures against homeopathy, which are pretty irrational, really. But let me talk a bit about Ben Venist. I actually met him at a conference before the famous or infamous Nature business. He gave a talk at a conference in Bermuda, I think, and where he explained the results that you've heard. And then he got various people to try out his experiments and support his results. This was published in Nature. And then there was this vicious attack by Maddox, as I've written in a commentary. This attack would probably not have been published. He was basically using editorial privilege to be able to publish it, because it wasn't a very justified thing. He had investigators who knew nothing about biology who claimed it wasn't, the experiment was misconceived. When people wrote in giving supporting evidence, they also, they were not allowed to have their work published. Okay, now I'm not in any way an expert on homeopathy. I also don't, maybe I'm a bit of an amateur on water, but let me say what I do know as a physicist. One point is that people claim to dismiss homeopathy on scientific grounds, but the arguments are faulty ones, they're irrational. The first argument is that because you've got no molecules left with a dilution, there can't be any effect. Well, homeopaths don't actually claim that it is the residual molecules that do it. What they say is that the water is affected by the biologically active substance that you put in, and that remains, in fact, may even be spread when you do the succussion process, shaking it, and so there's a different structure in water. So that's one argument which is faulty. I don't know if I'm able to share a screen, because I do have a slide, which is, no, anyway, I have a picture which I apparently can't show you, of a computer simulation done at Princeton University, which shows that water molecules group themselves together into complicated shapes. That isn't telling you about the biological activity, but it is suggesting that water can develop structure. The other arguments by people who know a bit more physics is to say that water cannot have a biologically effective structure because these bonds, they come and go very quickly. That's a fallacious argument, because you may have different time scales on a microscopic level and a large scale level. Magnets, for example, they change their structure quickly at the microscopic level, and yet they can remain magnetized for a long time. So this idea that because bonds come and go microscopically, you can't have a memory, that is also a fallacious argument. So basically, that's all I can. That's all I know about. I say that in principle, water could have a structure. Biology can. There might be biological activity. In fact, I'm interested in the idea that there can be, which is an idea of Ben Venist, actually. Ben Venist made the point, but it's not just the shapes of the molecules that are biologically active, but the activity over time. And he actually picked up, and Montagnier has picked up the idea that there can be signals which have biological activity. So water may be a much more complicated thing, as I believe people are starting to understand. So that's the physics side of it. So I'll stop.
Thank you so much, Professor Josephson. Professor Josephson has won the Nobel Award Nobel Prize Award in 1972. Is that right? But anyway, our next question is from Joy Wolf.
Thank you. I found that absolutely fascinating, particularly your personal story. Can I just ask if you have any dealings with the Multiple Sclerosis Society, whether they're aware of your work and whether there's any kind of response from them? It seems to me nothing short of a tragedy that multiple sclerosis victims are denied this opportunity of perhaps improving their condition, etc. And I feel very concerned about this and wonder if there's anything we can do.
Right, thank you. Well, I mean, I've certainly treated patients with multiple sclerosis over the years. It's like everything in life, you know. I began my treatment early on. I had symptoms, but I'd only had them, say, for about 2 months. So I do see patients who've had MS maybe for 10, 15 years, and then it becomes more difficult because there are physiological and pathology changes in structure. But I haven't been approached by the MS Society. I'm sure the MS Society are aware of homeopathy, and I do know that a lot of colleagues in homeopathy do treat multiple sclerosis. But I'd be more than happy to speak to them and try and, I think the whole thing is getting the illness, like any illness, is getting it very early on and treating it at that point.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks. The next question is David Rothburn.
Thank you. I think I'm unmuted. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes,
good afternoon, everybody. I suppose topical, and Ken, you did refer to it, but being a salesman at heart, there is an opportunity here with COVID-19, particularly around the long COVID symptoms that a lot of people are suffering, including my daughter, with smell and taste, and Menachem over there in Israel. You know, to get homeopathy sort of back into the mainstream, I guess it's got to get a win, and a clear evidence win. I think the comment was evidence there, you said before. And traditional medicine is probably going to be burdened with lots of other things, vaccines and other things. So there is an opportunity here. And I do believe in the body and self-repair. So do you see there's an opportunity? I know it sounds awful to talk about COVID in such a way, but to solve some of the COVID problems with homeopathy?
Well, I think, yes, certainly. I mean, COVID is no different to, it's an awful virus, and it has terrible implications, as you said, David, the long-term, long COVID symptoms. And I've certainly treated patients with loss of smell and taste who were prior to COVID, and they've improved. But I think this is where homeopathy may well come in. I mean, everybody is placing their hope on the vaccines. I am as well, that they're going to be the answer to release us from this awful pandemic. But I think there are going to be a lot of residual symptoms left behind. And I think, as you say, this is a huge opportunity. I think Menachem leads the way in Israel because already he's been given the green light by the hospital authorities to run these 2 trials, one in the north of Israel and one in Jerusalem. And I don't know whether Menachem would like to add anything to that regarding COVID and homeopathy. Menachem?
There is a big benefit in using homeopathy for, well, let's start with effect. I mean, our grandparents, when they were born and they were in the time that passed between their birth and their death, no additional virus came into our environment. The same viruses that existed when they were born were the viruses which had been in the world when they left the world. In the recent years, we see an increase in the numbers of viruses which occur in the world. In the last 15 years, in the last 50 years, we have more than 1,000 new viruses, starting with the HIV, which we know, and until the coronaviruses, which we are facing now, the third pandemic, actually, coronavirus pandemic. Now, every treatment, every antiviral treatment is always directed towards one virus. The treatment against the Ebola virus doesn't work against any other virus, whereas homeopathy, if homeopathy will prove itself as a good treatment for coronavirus, it will be a general treatment for any virus disease, because there is no difference in the technique of treating influenza. It's actually the same technique as we treat coronavirus, with very quick results. I mean, in the pilot that we made, we saw a response already after minutes to hours. We knew if we are in the right direction or in a wrong direction. So it is a clean, very inexpensive, and very efficacious treatment against corona.
Thank you both. The next question is from Val McKee.
Thank you, and thank you, Ken, for sharing your experiences and your knowledge and wisdom. How much do you think that when we talk about evidence-based medicine, that's actually sitting in a Newtonian view of the world? Whereas how much do you think that if we're looking at quantum physics, the evidence that we might be talking about lies within that? And I'm thinking particularly of like the Heisenberg principle, this whole issue of how we observe things that makes the difference. And are we not better to just acknowledge that it works?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I was talking to Menachem about this. Even if they want to go with the argument of placebo, it's about the outcomes that are important. You know, so what? You know, if people get better, I don't personally believe it's about placebo at all. But evidence-based medicine, which is the in term now, everything has to be evidence-based. There are lots of medications and procedures that are not particularly evidence-based that are in operation in hospitals. So I think the science, it is tricky. This is why we've struggled with it. I think we're learning more and more about science, as Professor Josephson has outlined, and Menachem, that there are answers, and it is in the quantum area. Russia is light years ahead of us. I was talking to a colleague in the US, and he said that what they've been doing in Moscow, in Russia, in their universities, they've kept quiet about it because of the East-West situation. But Vladimir Voykov has shown this activity, and we can't deny it. These are top world-rate scientists who are showing there's a cause and effect, and to walk away from it, and dare I say, to hear the head of the NHS, I'm not going to name names, say that homeopathy is a load of rubbish, you know. And, you know, people believe this narrative, you know, these people that we look to who are in positions of importance in our NHS, who make those, you know, scathing comments, you know, it's very destructive. It's what I said earlier about choice. Why take choice away? Give people a chance, you know, give them some hope. And that's all we're asking for in a democratic society. So, yeah, I think it's in the quantum, definitely in the quantum area. And I think Brian and Menachem would agree with that. And I know the other scientists who came to my conference would say the same thing.
Thank you. Next question is from Anne and Michael Crook in Hove.
Hello. I found that extremely interesting. I have used homeopathy, and I very much use acupuncture as well. But can you tell me how homeopathy can be used to help people with the side effects of chemotherapy, and if it is a useful form of medication?
Well, I'm going to hand that one across to Menachem, because I know, I mean, I've used it myself with patients in that setting, but I actually think Menachem was doing a lot of work in Jerusalem on the side of oncology, certainly from the point of view of radiotherapy or chemotherapy. Could you come in there, Menachem? I know you've worked extensively.
Yeah. At first, let me add something to the question of evidence-based medicine regarding homeopathy. So if somebody would be honest and will look at the literature, he will find out, you see, the highest level of research are reviews, reviews of clinical trials. And if you will count the positive reviews and compare them to negative reviews, you will find out that in the literature, in the last 40 years, there were 8 reviews. Only one of them is negative. But if you look at the literature, you will see that always the only review which is always quoted is the negative review. All the other reviews are forgotten. So one can say, okay, the negative review had been published in Lancet, which is a very good journal, but in Lancet 2 years earlier was a very positive review about homeopathy, but it is never quoted. Now, regarding the side effects of chemotherapy, we had very good results in nausea, vomiting, heat flashes, radiation damage, and so on and so on. I think we can cope very well with negative side effects. And it has also other benefits because it doesn't disturb the therapeutic effect of this chemotherapy, whereas other systems as let's say phytotherapy might also save the cancer cell. Homeopathic treatment will never do it.
Interesting, thank you.
Thank you. Next question is from Marsha and Todd.
I suppose we're very fortunate, myself having been the daughter of an NHS homeopathic practitioner, something that we grew up with. So when we had a problem that couldn't be treated, we actually asked, this was 8 years ago, we were actually given permission by our local medical trust to have appointments at the Homeopathic Hospital in London. And I'm so disappointed to hear that probably will no longer be available to us should we need it.
But more importantly was the success that we had through homeopathy that we hadn't had with conventional medicine.
So the important thing is somebody just said, if we can just get that through to all the other scientists, is its outcomes that are important, however, wherever they come from. So I just wanted to add a positive note to say, yeah, we're homeopaths.
Well, that's very nice. I mean, I've heard that. Because I don't want to give the impression that homeopathy cures everything, or there are cases that we fail with. What we tend to do is that we have a team of clinicians do homeopathy, some non-medical homeopaths, and so we invariably have a case conference about a patient that one of us can't get some benefit for, and usually when we have the case conference, we'll come up with another medicine, and lo and behold, the person will improve. So yeah, the Homeopathic Hospital in 2018, the London Royal London Homeopathic, or the Royal London Hospital for Integrated Medicines, it was known, was refused further funding, and that rides on the back of that select committee report in Parliament, which completely blew homeopathy out of the water. Again, you know, we're taking choice away from people in the NHS, and for £5 million a year for homeopathy for those 5 hospitals, it's such a pittance compared to the billions of pounds that the government, you know, supports the NHS with, and they're willing to take that choice away, unfortunately. But maybe we'll bring it back, hopefully.
We have one. We have Brian Josephson back, Professor, to ask another question.
Yes, well, it wasn't really a question, but a comment on the previous statement about, I forget what the question was now, but the point is that one make is that positive effects of homeopathy may occur not just because of the remedy, but the practitioner may also have an influence, a sort of a mental influence. There may be some kind of connection, which is actually possibly connected with the quantum situation, the observer effect in quantum mechanics. So that may be a factor. May also make the official kind of testing difficult, because it may mean that the homeopath needs to know what's happening, which of course you can't in a double-blind test. So anyway, we take into account the practitioner as well as the medicine.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a question from Dr. Louise Hurcott.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'm actually a medical historian, and I think it's really, really important to point out to everybody that some of the problems with people being unhappy about no clinical trials for homeopathy or other so-called alternative medicine, this is linked to the biomedical model, which is our predominant medical model. The problem with that is it's only a couple of 100 years old, and for thousands of years, herbal medicine and all sorts of other types of models, which were a holistic mind-body dualism, they were predominant models. So I think it's really important for everyone to remember that, well, personally, I think homeopathy has as much value, if I don't want to say if not more, but I think it's a tremendously important part of medicine, which deserves more respect from the biomedical hierarchy.
Yeah,
I
would agree with that. Definitely. Just on the comments that Brian made, I think that's true. I think you could apply that to GPs and surgeons, you know, and you hear of people that, you know, that are unwell and they need surgery. There's one particular surgeon that stands out that gets incredible results. I understand that actually either the General Medical Council or the BMA were actually keeping statistics on surgeons, particularly as to their mortality rates, and publishing them, which was quite horrifying to some of the surgeons, because they didn't want people, I suppose, to know that they had more mortality rates than others. So this effect of maybe, I think there's something in that, you know, there are certain clinicians, doctors that seem to stand out as star players and get really good outcomes for their patients, and they're using treatments, of course, but there may be this, I'm sure Brian is right about this mind body, it's probably in the quantum area. But I would just add that the animal trials are interesting, because it's an argument that the skeptics find difficult to get round, and that is there are incredible amounts of animal studies. A double-blind study on cows with mastitis, 50 cows in one field, 50 in the other, and they recorded they put homeopathic medicine in the drinking tank, and over 6 months they recorded the instance of mastitis in the untreated herd, as opposed to the incidence in the homeopathic treated. And I think in the 50 cows in the treated side, there were 2 instances of mastitis, and in the other herd, probably 50%. So I find it, you know, difficult for people to say that's placebo. We now do hear from the skeptics that the farmer has an affinity for the cattle, and the cattle think he's a great guy, and that's a little bit difficult to swallow. But you know, likewise, how do you evaluate psychotherapy and counselling? How do you put that into a test tube? There are conventional doctors who practiced psychoanalysis, psychotherapy, and they get very good outcomes. How do you measure that? Why is it that homeopathy has to be lambasted and eradicated from after 150 years of helping people and taking the choice, of course, away?
Thank you. Our last question is from Ray Tamam. Ray, if you would.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Aaron, very nice to see you again, and thank you for coming and bringing your esteemed colleagues with you. We've spoken briefly about homeopathy recently. I just wanted to ask a question in relation to mental health. Has homeopathy had success helping people in that area as well as physical?
Yeah, absolutely, because homeopathic consultation, even if it's an arthritic knee or a diabetic person or, you know, colitis or eczema, it always takes into consideration the emotional state of the patient. And all of the medicines that we have, with all the observations over 100 years, document the mental state as well as the physical state. And I can tell you that I saw a patient with colitis, and this lady had colitis for 10 years, quite serious colitis. And the story was that it kicked off 3 months after her husband died, who she was devoted to. Now, that's not to say that, you know, grief is the only thing, but when I treated her for grief with a remedy, as we call them, that embraced you know, bowel symptoms, but had a very strong link to grief, she got better within a couple of months. So the mind-body connection is really important. And likewise, I've treated patients, serious patients. I've treated a patient that tried to commit suicide 3 times. And I'm just saying, when I say that, I want to just add that that is in conjunction with their consultant, their psychiatrist. It wasn't just out on a limb with homeopathy, but the treatments I added in appeared to make a difference. I can think of one young lad that tried to hang himself on several occasions and is now trained and working as a paramedic, and that's all behind him. Whether that's my intervention or the antidepressants, I don't know, but certainly mental states can be treated. One of the par excellence results is in grief. You know, people who've lost somebody very dear or even a pet, they seem to do really well on a medicine we call Ignatia. I'm sure Menachem knows about, would verify that. So yeah, depression, anxiety, loneliness, isolation. You can't change the person's life, but you can modify how their emotional reaction to it and make things a little bit easier. And I think that's, again, worth having and has value.
Thank you very much. If you've got time for one more question, we have Jack Zaloof. Jack, if you could turn your camera on, that would be great.
Just mentioning diabetes there, is there anything with type 1 diabetes for homeopathy, and also spinal injury caused by a virus?
Well, I think the spinal injury, certainly there are medicines that we use for damage to the nervous system. Diabetes type 1, it's a genetic condition, as you probably know. So I can't say categorically that I've had huge responses with that. I think because it's genetic. Certainly type 2 diabetes, I've had very good results with that. I should also add that lifestyle comes into homeopathy, and any condition, and GPs consultants are realizing now that, you know, it's not just taking a pill for all ills. It's about a matter of losing weight, getting some exercise, you know, being careful what you're eating. We preach this all the time to all patients who have homeopathy. It's about lifestyle. This was noted in Hahnemann's writings hundreds of years ago, that you need to change your life a bit as well as having treatment. So I would say that, you know, type 1 would be difficult. I don't know whether Menachem would like to add something there in his experience of type 1 diabetes, whether he's treated any patients in Israel with this.
Well, I totally agree with you. I think that type 1 diabetes, I had never cured the type 1 diabetes. The only thing that you can do with type 1 diabetes is to change the quick changes in the level of glucose. You know, type 1, you can see a patient with 300 sugar, and after a short time he's in a hypo condition. So if he's treated with homeopathy, the only thing that you'll suddenly see the difference between the quick changes, and suddenly you see a level, a a constant level of, or more or less a constant level of glucose. And that's the only achievement that I saw in type 1 diabetes. But you know, there are many people that claim that they heal. I had never cured. I mean, after, I would say, almost 50 years of working as a homeopathic physician, I had never cured, not even one type 1 diabetes. Whereas type 2 diabetes, you can really reach cures, especially if you catch it in the beginning of the disease.
I would agree with that. And I think the benefit of stabilizing the blood sugar spikes has some advantage. You know, if homeopathy can do that, that's something positive, at least in type 1.
Thank you, everyone, so much. Just to draw this event to its conclusion, I'd like to welcome Minister Ofef Fora, Head of the Economic and Trade Mission to the UK from the Embassy of Israel, to just say a few words.
Thank you very much, Joe. I think the last time I interacted with this group was before December, when we celebrated Hanukkah. At that time, I think that the COVID vaccine was just rolled out. So as I mentioned, we can see the light in the end of the tunnel. And I think that as now the COVID vaccine is being rolled out even further in the UK, I do believe that we'll be able to have such meetings on a 3D, not on a 2D, and be able to see each other and connect to each other. I would like to thank very much Lord Ward-Atherton for his speech, and the topic itself. It's something which is very involving all of us, given the fact that specifically in Israel, just like in the UK, the medical, I would say, medical world was a bit skeptic about this kind of medication. But as time goes further, there is more and more openness. For example, 35% of the people who have private insurance in Israel are covered in some way for homeopathic treatment, as well as the additional insurances which are provided by Israeli HMOs. So as Bob Dylan said in his very famous song, times they are changing, and there is more and more openness for this kind of medication, which I believe that it's only a matter of time that more and more of these practices will be introduced in the more conservative healthcare system. I would like just to summarize and thank you very much Joe Ozer and also the relationship, the very strong relationship I have personally with the BICC. We are working very closely together, and I really appreciate this kind of engagement in order to bridge between Israel and the UK. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. And we hope to see you on our next event, which we'll let you know of very soon. Take care.